Hello, Tony here from Lightwave Digital. In today's tutorial we're going to be looking at how to add particles to a meteorite in Lightwave 3D. So I've built this basic scene, and what I'll do is I'll provide this scene so you can go along with it. What I'll do is I'll explain the scene first and go into how we're going to make the particles. So if I just put VPR on in a camera view. So I've got this basic scene here with the Earth. The Earth has got a glow on, but it's in post. So if we go to the more options, image processing, and then you'll see here, look, after image filters, which is done in post, there's a glow on the Earth and the clouds layer. Okay, so if I just click quickly render it, in fact I'll just show it you because it literally takes, there we go. So you can see it's got a glow on as well. Okay, so in the scene what I've got is the Earth. I've got 5 different cameras, and I've got a meteorite, and then I'm using 2 particle emitters. So if we just drag along, and then you'll see the actual meteorite pass the camera with the particles on, and then it travels towards the Earth, and at frame 50 it jumps then to a side camera. So the reason it's jumping is because under utilities, master plugins, I'm using the universal camera selector under the drop down here. And then what you do with this is you choose a camera and you click add on whatever frame it's on. So I've got it jumping at certain stages here, look, 50, 160, 260 and 400. So with the actual second camera, the side camera, it's also got a zoom, so it zooms in on the meteorite as it's actually going towards the Earth. And then when it hits a certain point, it will then jump to a back camera where it's kind of just traveling towards the Earth, and the meteorite's here, look, as you can see. And then it carries on, and then it will jump to a close-up camera which slowly actually zooms in on the camera, but also as it's starting to hit Earth's atmosphere, it starts adding the actual flames and stuff, and that's a second emitter. And then it carries on heading towards Earth. We'll just let VPR settle a little bit. As you can see, it's heading towards Earth, and again, and when it hits 400 it jumps to an actual camera behind the Earth. So which camera is that, by the way? So at the back, look, and you'll see here there's like an impact which I'm using a lens flare, and that it finishes like that. So where the actual lens flare gives this kind of where the actual meteorite's kind of hitting, and that's where I've ended it. But it's more about the 2 emitters I'm using to get the effect of the kind of bit of dust that's kind of coming off the meteorite, and then the flames when it's hitting the atmosphere. So like I said, I'll provide this scene, and basically you can go along, and what I'll do now is I'll go through how you actually add those particles to the scene. Okay, so I've got the scene, and with this scene, I've removed the actual particles, so there is none on it. And what we'll do is we'll add the particles to it. So to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to make the actual meteorite object here. We're going to make this the emitter. So to do this, what you need to do is make sure you're on it, go to properties, effects, and then go down to where it says emitter, double click it, and then we've got the settings to start adding the settings to it. So if we work our way down the actual emitter, and we'll start with the generator. So for the birth rate, I'm going to have, say, 50. For the generated by, I'm not going to use seconds or frames, I'm going to use speed. So the particles are going to be generated from the surface of the actual meteorite by the speed it's moving. So I'll leave object and surface here. For size, I'm not wanting any size change. Everything else the same apart from the emitter limit. We're going to add a few zeros so we don't run out. And the fix, I don't want it to start at any certain frame, I just want it to start straight away. So that's the actual generator. For the next tab, the particle tab, we're going to leave everything the same apart from what we're going to do is for the lifetime we're going to change it to 120. So each particle is going to live and die over 120 frames. So that's the only thing we need to change on here. With the motion options, I'm not going to change too much again. For the velocity, I'm going to change it to 20%. So it's going to reduce the speed of the actual particles down to 20%. Right, I don't want 100% is the normal speed, like, but I want them to be a lot slower. I'm also going to put a slight explosion and vibration, say 0.2 in each. So this will make them move like around erratically as well. And again, that's it for this. So just slowing it down a bit, but making it also vibrate a little bit. Next, let's jump to the ETC tab. So with this, I'm not adding any kind of gravity because there is no gravity in space. What I'm going to do is the position blur and the parent blur, I'm going to just chop it off to 50%, so our particles are more around the outside of the actual object. So once we've done this, I always like to then click the calculate so we get a more accurate result. Okay, so next what we want to do is we can obviously play through and watch the actual emitter, but obviously particles are invisible unless you texture them, so that's what we're going to do now. We're going to use hypervoxels to texture our particles. So before we start actually texturing our emitters, what we need to do is we need to go to the render tab, render properties, volumetrics, and make sure use legacy volumetrics is on, otherwise it's not going to work. So once you've done that, we go over to the more drop down, image processing, legacy volumetrics, and then from the drop down we're looking at hypervoxels 3. So to speed things up, what I've done is I've made a preset of the actual emitter from my scene. So because what I'm going to do is I'll load it on and then go through the settings rather than me trying to remember all my settings and take a lot longer. So what you do with this is you click on the actual Meteorite, activate it. If we just put VPR on, this is what you get. Okay, but what we're going to do is we're going to load in, and if you don't see it straight away, go to the bottom and go to all files, and we're going to load in the space dust. So I'll give you this, and it comes up with this, and we want all of this, so just press OK. Do you want to keep, and it'll say, do you want to load the preset size? Yes, we do. And you will see here it's added the size and everything. So if we go through this, what I've done is I've changed the object type to sprite, which is giving it more of a mist kind of effect. It's got a particle size of 24 millimeters, just over, size variation of 1000. So this is quite high, but for every particle, I don't want them all to be the same. I want them to be completely a good variation to them. For velocity, that's I've put it, so instead of X, Y, Z, I've put it to the velocity so it follows the way the particles move, and also I've stretched them out to about 500, so it will help blend them together. This will, and then I've added the actual blending scale to 150, and then I've clicked show particles and use particle color so we can see it in rough in our GI as well. So that's for the first tab, zipped through it, but it'll be a lot quicker than me trying to remember my settings. Then we go to the shading tab for under basics. Started off with a grey background colour, then under the little T I've changed it to gradient, and for the input I'm using particle A. So what this is going to do between 0 and 120, and that, if you remember, these particles are living and dying from the particle emitter from 0 to 120. So it's going to start off on this brown colour that's going to go through this grey, that's slowly going to fade out grey to nothing. That's what this is doing. It's using this over its age of its life. So going from this brown dust to a grey dust, well, grey brown, to disappearing. So that's what that is. And then for the luminosity, I've put it to 150. It don't have to be that high really. And then for texture value, so I'm going to work with the actual hypertexture tab here. I've got it starting off at actual black, going through to a grey, faded out grey to nothing under the texture value. Okay, and then under hypervoxels, I've got fractional noise. I've changed some of the settings here. Look, 6, 0.54. Texture amplifier. If I click on this, I've added a texture, a basic procedural texture. That's why we're getting it splotchy everywhere as well. But and then I've just left everything the same there. I've changed the texture effect to dissolve and expand. So they're actually dissolving and expanding as they're actually living and dying. And then the speed effect for that, I've put it right low because I don't want it to be too fast. And then the size for this actual procedural fractional noise is 300 millimeters X, Y, and Z. So again, that's what I've used for that. And like I said, in the texture amplifier for the text, I've just used a default kind of turbulence and not changed it. And then if we go back, the opacity I've turned down, and then I've just clicked on oriented slice raise and use all the lights, and that's how we get that effect that I've got here of the dust and that. And again, once you load this up, there's nothing to stop you playing around with it and seeing if you can make it better. I think this is a good starting point. However, it could be better, and I might work on that and show a video of it if I get the time. But this will give you a good starting point to kind of experiment with, rather than kind of going in and not sure 100%. Something else that is in the hypervoxels, if you go to presets, there is loads of presets. And in our next part, which is going to be the atmosphere, I'm going to use the fireball preset as a starting point and then go from there rather than going in with nothing. But again, you can play around with these and see what stuff there is that you could maybe use. So that's the first one done, as you can see. And I've zipped through it. So the next is what I'm going to do is when it hits the Earth's atmosphere, which has nothing on it at the minute, we're going to make it burn up as it goes to the atmosphere. Now that we've set up the actual dust, what we need to do is set up the atmospheric. And there's a few ways you can do this for the atmospheric particles. Now I've just thought I want to just do it the simplest way I can. And there is a few simple ways, but what I've done is I've just added a standalone particle emitter and placed it at the front of where the actual meteorite's hitting the actual Earth. Now you couldn't do it with collision. You could add a collision to the front, so when it actually hits the Earth, within that collision point, the particles would emit from a second meteorite particles for the surface. But I just do it this way because I just find it easier having a separate standalone particle emitter. So we'll do that and speed up the system. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off the original one on my actual asteroid, and then if you watch the asteroid as it's heading towards the Earth, in fact let me just turn this off and zoom out, and it's heading along and jumping, and you can see like it's this kind of area here at the front where I just need to attach it. Okay. So also, if you want to stop the jumping between cameras, go to utilities, master plugins, and just unkick it here. Look, just remember to turn it back on after. Okay. So let's choose Meteorite. Let's zoom in and let's have a look roughly. So if we look in, we can tell that this front bit, as it plays through, even though it's twisting, ends up at the front. So that's where I'm going to place the emitter. So to do this, under the item tab, all we do is go to dynamic object, particle, give it a name. I'll call it Atmos. Okay. Which is going to add to the center of your scene. So let's just bring it over to where we're working from, and we need to reduce the size down to roughly the front area of this. So first thing, before I change any other settings, let's just change some of this. So I'm trying to remember exactly the settings I had. It's just 63, something like that. Yeah, something like this. And then I'm going to place it so it's covering the front half of the emitter. Once you've done that and it's selected still, go to Setup, Motion Options, and then at the top where it says parent it to the emitter. So now we know it's going to be there all the time, ready. Okay. So next, we don't want it to start until it jumps to that frame where it starts kind of happening. Where I'm going to say we don't want any emitters to start. Let's just say 300. So I'm going to fix it at 300. Okay. So nothing's happening, and then at 300, you can see that's when they're going to start emitting. Yeah. And now let's have a look at the other settings. So for the birth rate, I'm going to make it, let's make it 35, and we'll do it by frame. We'll leave the nozzle as sphere, so it's like coming from a ball, like an oval shape, because I think that might work better. We don't want any change. Let's add a couple of zeros in to make sure we've got enough. So now, like I said before, it's flying along, dooby-dooby-doo, and then as it's hitting the Earth's atmosphere, it's starting to produce the emitters. Okay, so next tab, particles. So with this, I'm going to leave everything. I mean, you can leave it at lifetime for 60, so it'll give you a longer like tail. And so, I mean, currently all I've done is I've changed it to 30, and I've done it so as it hits the atmosphere, only it's going to live for 30 frames each particle. So it means the tail's going to be a bit shorter, so it's going to be like hot reds through to like oranges through to like a dusty kind of colour. So again, like most things, you can play around with this if you want, but that's the actual only setting under this tab that I've changed. And then for the motion, I'm going to leave everything the same, but what we'll do is we'll put a low value for the explosion and low for the vibration, so it gives it a bit more individually, gives it a bit of movement. So 0.05 and 0.1. Everything else will leave the same. Okay, and then for the last, all I'm going to do is I'm going to leave everything the same. I'm just going to put the parent motion down to 50. Okay, and then let's have a look. So it's coming along, and then it hits the atmosphere, starts burning up, and then boom, which will jump to another part. So let's leave it, say, around here. So like before, if we just shut this down, and you can go back and experiment with this whenever you want. There is no particles, so we need to texture them. Sorry, there is particles, we need to texture them. So we'll go to image processing, double click, and we've got atmosphere this time. We'll activate it, and again, like before, rather than go through the settings, I'll load what I've got. There we go, atmosphere. Okay, we want everything and the size, and then you've got it loaded here. Look, so as you can see, as it's coming towards the atmosphere, it's hitting it and starting to burn up. Now you can make this longer. Now remember, it's 30 frames a second for it to live and die, but if you make it 60, it'll be double that length, and you can have it fading out. So if I just quickly go through the settings again, particle size just 12.5 millimeters. Like before, I've used 1,000 variation, velocity 300 variation. I mean, you can play around with this. If I put double in, or if I put none in, they change slightly, but you need that particle age. And then I've got 150-ish, and then before I've got that particle, show particle and show particle colours, even though it isn't really showing the colours, but yeah. And then shading, like before, colour, I've got this background colour, this yellow. And then I've gone particle age. Now this is where the colour is. So you can see here where it's going from 0 to 30. because it's living and dying for 30 frames. So if you was going to do 60, you need to make this 60, and it's going from this red colour through to different reds to like a darky red to a black. I mean, the end part here, you could fade it out if you want, so they fade out a bit. If you're looking, or fade it out a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm making it darker, but it looks better as it's going darker. But you could, again, it might want to be going a bit longer. So that's particle aging, because it's aging through all these, and you can make these whatever colour you want, and you can make them longer and play around with them. It's, like I said, I think this is a good starting point, but it's definitely, I wouldn't say it's a final. And luminosity, very single, so just left it with local density, and I've just got this little black bit at the kind of back fading out and into the white, and again, 178 for opacity, 93 density. If I go into hyper textures, this time we're using turbulence noise at 100% turbulence, and the effector speed. So this turbulence here is this effect you're getting inside of here, and it's just turbulence. I mean, you can change it, billowing, dissolve. Like the other one had dissolve and expand, but I just felt turbulence was a bit better on this one, and I've just left it at the same size. But again, you play around with it, as like I said. So what you could do, and it hits the atmosphere here, which is quite nice. So what we can do is, that's me zipping through that. But like I said, once you've got this starting point, you can play around with them and then go and save these out for another project if you want. And again, it's the same with your emitters. So you can come into your emitters, and you can come and save that whole thing out to load onto another scene another time. And again, like I said, you could play around with everything in here. So the things I need to do is I need to turn this back on. I do like to, like I said, calculate it just to get a more accurate option. And then as it's going through, so obviously we've got the actual dust, original dust, and we've got the actual hitting the atmosphere. And the other thing I had on was I had this camera switcher. So if we go back, as I said before, it starts off at this shot, hits 50, and it's going to jump to the side, which zooms in, and it keeps going, and then it drops behind, and then you carry on going. And then it drops to the kind of close up, and then if we keep going, you'll notice this is where it starts hitting the atmosphere. Go back a bit, so it's just starting to hit, and then it carries on, and then it jumps to the last frame where it's behind, and we've got that bright light, and that's it. I'm going to provide the scene, like I said. I will provide the actual hypervoxels preset. So my suggestion is to load them in. When I did the hypervoxels, all I did to start with is with the atmospheres, I went to presets and then over to fire and smoke, and I just loaded this fireball, and then it gave me a good start. I just switched it to sprite, and then I went from there. But you can play with all of these. I've just, to make them blend, make sure you've got a good size variation, play around with the blending, and you can't really rush these things. But again, hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please check out the beginner's intro to emitters so you'll know a little bit more about them. And I'll also put a few other links to useful emitters tutorials as well. So thanks for listening. See you next time.